Welcome. We're here for our fourth episode of Base Camp live stream, and we've got a special guest with us here that's made the rounds of Base Camp all throughout the state of Michigan. Our good friend Clayton Cravino, the man from down under, so I'll prepare you. He's got a bit of an accent. Doesn't sound like a Western Michigan thing, so it'll keep things a little spicy for our show here today. But we're excited that you've jumped on. We're hoping that a bunch of you are watching tonight. Terrible weather outside, which is great for broadcasting and for live streaming for sure. So thank you for joining us. We're going to continue on this schedule about every other week, and we'll talk about our next speaker at the end of tonight. But our next broadcast, our next live stream will actually be May 31st. So we're going to do that for as long as the breweries stay closed and restaurants for that matter. We're very eager to get back inside those buildings. I have probably about 12 different guys throughout the state of Michigan, and even a guy in Tennessee today had emailed and says, hey man, we're ready to start this base camp up in Tennessee as soon as things open up. So we're very eager to get back into physical locations. I know many of us miss that, and but until then, we're going to do this, and then even as they do open up, we'll probably move this particular live stream format to a once a month, but until then, we'll go every other month. So thank you for coming. Appreciate you coming from all over. We're now on YouTube and Facebook. You'll notice tonight that there's two different cameras that are operating, so we're trying to kind of dice it up a little bit. I've got ADD, so it's hard for me to just look at one static screen the whole time, so hopefully this will be a little bit more animated and a little bit more robust of an experience for you as the viewer. So a couple things that I just want to talk about up on the front end. If we can put some of those slides up here that we can talk about before we actually get into the interview itself. And the first one is called Camp 1. And many of you are aware of what this is. Some of you are not, but it happens twice a week now on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It's at 7 p.m. and it's a Zoom group. So I don't know who has stock in Zoom right now, but you're doing very well. This company is just blown up. Everybody seems to be Zooming nowadays. So it's just a great way for us to continue what happens on these live stream events or in breweries for that matter. It gives us an opportunity to get to know you better and us better. It's very casual. It's very conversational. So there's no real curriculum that we walk through. There are other men's groups that do that, and they do it very well. And so we're always trying to chart territory that is not so discovered. And one of the things that we have found is that there's not a lot of men's groups that get together just simply for the art of conversation. And it's a wonderful time for you to talk about whatever you want to talk about. There's no real hyperstructure to it. Other than that, what stays in the group, what is said in the group actually stays in the group. So that's on Zoom. Every Tuesday and Thursday night, you can go to graceexplorations.com, which is on the screen that you're looking at, and click on that link, and that'll put you right into the Zoom group at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we'd love for you to be a part of that. Also, if we can put up our giving slide, we've had some generous friends that have enabled us to actually put on these particular episodes. They cost us to produce about $500 each, and some people have stepped up to the plate to help us do that. This is something that we were hoping to actually raise money for first and then do, and because of the global pandemic, we found ourselves in a situation where like, you know what, I think we need to do this a little bit sooner than what we thought. So we just stepped out in faith, and God has been good. But we'd like you to think of this as a base camp in a brewery where everybody contributes. So just like we do at the brewery, we have a pitcher at the end of the table. Guys come in, and then either on their way in or their way out, we suggest a $5 donation at the door. If you guys could help us with that, that would be fantastic, because right now just a couple of people are carrying the load for these, and we're very grateful for them. Some of them are probably watching tonight, super friends of our ministry. But if everybody can contribute a little bit, just go to graceexplorations.com and click on the donate button. It's there prominently on the front page. And if you want to learn more about what we do beyond even live stream, we have all kinds of other ministries that we're a part of. You can just go to our Partner With Us page, and you can learn more about that there as well. So there's a thought that I'd like to introduce tonight, and it's this idea that Clayton has probably heard in the mountains, and I have as well. I'm not even sure who said it. I Googled it, and a couple of different names came up, so I'm not going to prescribe it to anybody, but it's a great thought because I think it sets the stage for our interview tonight. And by the way, while this interview is going on, think of some questions that maybe you want to ask Clayton afterwards. We're doing this much like we do at our physical base camps in that we allow for Q&A afterwards, so it's not just a monologue. But you can just go ahead and type those in the sidebars, whether you're on Facebook or on YouTube. Both of them stream into our platform, and so we can actually prepare those and answer those for you as best we can. But this idea is this, and it's kind of deep, so you got to think about it for a while, because it's one of those things where, wow, that's got a lot of nuance to it. And the statement is this: climbing has much meaning but little purpose. So Clayton and I have been on enough expeditions and climbing. He's actually been on Everest to base camp, and I've climbed 5 of the 7 continental summits around the world and skied to the North Pole and spent 5 summers actually, on Mount Ararat as a lead mountaineer, helping a group of scientists search for Noah's Ark in the film Finding Noah. But you walk away from these extreme expeditions and you're wondering, what was really the purpose of that? You know, people are risking their lives and their limbs, and they're just going out there and they're coming back with frostnip or frostbite, or in worst case scenarios, they don't come home. We had that happen during one of our seasons on Ararat, and I've seen people injured high on mountains, and I've seen people having to be dramatically rescued high on mountains. And Clayton was part of an incredibly epic story of survival and rescue, the likes of which Everest had never really seen before. But you kind of scratch your head and you walk back and you're like, what was that really? What was the purpose of that for? And I would just suggest to you that let's maybe get off the purpose bandwagon just for a little bit, because sometimes I think we endlessly try to find the purpose for every single thing. Like, what's the purpose of the pandemic? And how does this weave into a greater story? And I just think there's a cosmic chess game that's going on. And I think God is already knows the outcome of how this particular event is going to play out. He's already 20 steps ahead, so he's an expert chess master. And in a cosmic, real sense, he already knows how this thing's going to play out. So all we need to do is just stay on the chessboard and play our part, or whatever that is. And maybe that's the same way with mountains, and maybe that's the same way with life. Is maybe the real key is not so much the purpose of something, but what's the meaning of it? What's the take-home idea that you walk away with? And so with that idea, I want to introduce Clayton Cravino. Clayton is our guest with us here tonight, and Clayton experienced something very dramatic on April 25th, but you're probably wondering, how in the world does a guy from Australia, from down under, end up here in Grand Rapids? So maybe we can start, Clayton, with how that happened. If you want to talk a little bit about your childhood as well, maybe just set the stage before we get into the real meat of the story here. What brought you to Grand Rapids? How did you find this place?
Well, that's an interesting story. Basically, my wife. We met. Well, how far should I go back?
Maybe the first time you met, or I know some of the particulars of it, but...
Oh, yeah. No, my upbringing, I'm the eldest of 5 kids.
Okay.
My parents divorced when I was 12. And throughout that whole journey, though, my mom always took us to church. The church we were at was a Church of God. And it just so happened that it was affiliated with a university in Indiana called Anderson. And I had grown up with students coming over every year on a missions trip, really, for a couple of weeks, and they would come out and stay with us. And that just happened every year. So I'd grown up with that. Fast forward to 1999, and my wife, Holly, happened to be of the group, the last group that was coming out from Anderson, out to the church. So long story short, we basically met back out home in Australia, and then dated, kind of did the internet thing a little bit, but not really, because it wasn't quite, a lot of that going on back then. Some expensive phone bills, a lot of talking, a lot of chatting. And then we kind of realized that there was something going on here. So fast forward again, she invited me over. I came over in the Christmas of 99. Waited for the whole world to stop spinning when it was supposed to, but it never did. Right. And
Y2K, for those of you that are not even born then.
That's right. I forget. It's 20 years ago. So
yeah.
Yeah, and then we basically knew then that this was, a for sure thing. And we got married in August of 2000. And because of circumstance and my visa and all of that, it's people that are going through that understand what that's like, trying to live in a different country and get married to someone. But I went back home, lived out home for a couple of years. Holly joined me out there. And then September 11 happened, and we were actually starting a life out in Australia. And because of that, and I was applying for my permanent residency over here in the US, it fast-tracked everything. So we had to make a decision of where we were going to, live for the next, 6 months or so. And we basically had already gone through the process, and we said, well, let's just complete it. So we sold up everything that we had in Australia and moved here and been here ever since.
Wow. And you're just kind of a cool guy. I mean, you look like, we talked ahead of time, you look like Stonewall Jackson. You got that Civil War, really cool beard guy. Look, I couldn't grow that. It just wouldn't look right. It's kind of like Conan O'Brien growing a beard. It just doesn't work very well. But you've got the face for that. But you're just this cool cat. You're one of the most laid back guys that I know. But what I didn't know, and this happened maybe a year ago, you and I were breaking bread together. We were having a meal. And I noticed that you were eating very slowly. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And so I asked because I had an employee at one of my companies that I used to own, he had literally a small esophagus, and he could only eat very slowly, couldn't take those, anything like a horse pill that we take with vitamins or whatever. And so tell us why you're eating slow. I thought that was really a profound insight into the story and how you grew up and what that was like that many people, quite frankly, can't really relate to.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, my parents divorced when I was 12, and that was it was something that happened. Looking back on all of that now, you understand it as an adult, and as a kid, it's difficult to understand. So as a result of that, my mom raised us 5 kids. And I mean, we moved around to so many different houses, so many different places I can remember as a kid. And being the eldest, and I was only 12, the youngest, Christy, she's 9 years younger than I am. So just the burden of, not ever having enough, making sure that, the other kids are fed. Just that constant. You're
almost becoming a dad, really, in many ways, the man of the house.
A little bit, and that's kind of what it felt like. And that kind of plays into this story of this whole journey that my brother and I wanted to take through Nepal. But there's so many pieces of this that I'm dealing with now as a 46. Oh man. As a 46-year-old man, figuring that all out. And you look back on those things as, just events that happened.
Yeah. At the time that you can't put into the larger piece.
Right, yeah. Right. But a lot of that has shaped who I am now at 46. Out of just thinking back on those things and looking back on those things, and then realizing that those are the things that have really made me who I am today.
So the eating slow part, that just was more of.
Right. Well, it's part of that. Just, I want to make sure that other people,
are getting fed
first.
Yeah.
And, I do that now. I cook for everyone and make sure that everyone gets fed, and I just eat last. And it's just something that I've done. But I mean, me, I'm slow. I don't.
You're a chill guy.
That's right. I'm just laid back, and when we joke about it when people come over to our house, like time just disappears.
Yeah.
And that's
you're really good at living in the now.
Right. And that's part of this story too. And that one of the things that I really push and advocate for is really truly being present.
Yeah.
Where you're at.
I just remember you mentioning that it was in regards to the meal that you would savor the meal and go as slow as possible because you didn't necessarily know when the next one was going to come. Mm-hmm. And I thought, wow, that was really profound. And there are people that can relate to that. Many of us can't. But this idea that you have to be present in that moment, even eating, because you don't know when the next meal is coming. And so it seems like in some ways your whole life has taught you to appreciate literally what's on the table in front of you. Don't worry about the next meal. I mean, this is almost like Jesus talking to the people, right? Don't worry about tomorrow. Just be present in the moment and let God take care of what happens next. But I thought, wow, that really set the stage for your life. And it's probably one of the major themes that's come out of your life is this idea of helping busy Americans, especially West Michigan Dutch people, which you've married into. We like to exhaust every single minute of the day. There's this tremendous amount of compulsion and guilt. I mean, if we have nothing else to do, we're going to scrub the streets.
Right.
We have festivals that do this stuff. And now this pandemic is here. And in many ways, many of us are getting a master class in just being present
Yeah.
You know, you can't always do what you want to do when you want to do it. And the rest of the world lives like that. But in a first world country like the U.S., that's not necessarily the case. So you're growing up, the family split. You're becoming, in many ways, the man of the house, the oldest. You feel a sense of responsibility. You're carrying a lot on your shoulders. Probably didn't realize it at the time. And everything from mealtime to work to everything. And you were really the first, if not the only, that has come to the faith in your family, or are there others that have come to the faith as well?
Yeah, I wouldn't say like come to the faith. So faith. I mean, we all grew up in the church.
Okay.
Certainly not my younger siblings as much as us older three, because there's a bit of a gap.
Okay.
And then my brother's in that split, so it was just a little different. Growing up, and I think because us three older ones, we saw the family together. I mean, my dad never came to church with us, but my mum always took us there. And just that grounding. And I think for me also is that, I'm not perfect. I've done a lot of bad stuff, like wrong stuff.
That's why you've been a featured speaker at Base Camp.
That's right. Yeah,
we like guys that have learned from failing.
That's right. There's plenty to pull from.
Yeah.
But and that really, I think for me, is having that ability to be able to, that redemptive piece of faith, I think has always grounded me with that. Now, granted, I still do things wrong, but not as much as before. And I have this inner, calm about, everything that, didn't go well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So getting back to that faith thing, no, I don't believe that, my other siblings, run with church, and as much as what we think of it as here in West Michigan. So.
Yeah. And we'll circle back to that, because that's really the impetus and your highest goal. I wouldn't say goal. Your highest hope for doing that climb was more than just getting to base camp. You were hoping that some things would happen along that journey that would have really eclipsed the physicality of the achievement, and you were hoping for something more spiritual to happen between you and your climbing mate, your brother. So I'm trying to get this sequence here right. I know that the event happened on Everest in 2015, and you did Rainier in Washington State. What year was that?
Yeah, that was a couple of years after. Afterwards,
okay.
Yep.
So that wasn't before. So you basically shot for the moon. I mean,
yeah, we did.
Wow. I mean, that's not for those of you that are not climbers, the Everest Base Camp Base Camp Trek. Wow, I'm really getting the words here mixed up. Is one of those iconic treks in the world, and it's arduous. Even though you're only necessarily going to the altitude of Everest Base Camp, which is about 17.5, this is not a quick jaunt. I mean, it's up and down, and you're climbing, and then to get back, this is a very remote part of the Himalayas. So you really shot for the moon in this thing. What was, tell us, how did, most people don't just sit down and think, maybe I'll just go on a trek to Everest Base Camp. How did that come about, and how did that connect with your brother, and how did this whole journey start?
Yeah, well, it goes back to some of that history. So, one of the bigger shortcomings that I've always kind of felt was not being enough of a father figure in my siblings. I mean, after you're 46 and you look back at all of that stuff, have your own kids, then you realize there's always more that you can do.
Yeah.
So anyway, fast forward through all of that. During the time when my wife and I got married, I just kind of up and disappeared at that point. I'd met this woman, and it was perfect, and it was God. I mean, He really brought us together, and we still believe that today. Just the timing of everything and how it all worked out. But on the flip side of that, I recognized and realized that I kind of also felt like I just ripped myself away from the rest of the family. And that's something that, I've always kind of felt bad on. But, everybody's got to leave the nest.
Yeah.
You know, you need to make a life for yourself. I mean, Holly and I had been married for 15 years then at that point already. So we had gotten married, went back at home for a couple of years, had a bit of a life out there. And then, you know, basically 9/11 happened, and then we were ripped again from being out there, and then planted back over here. So it was just such a quick thing, and I didn't realize the relationships that I had with my siblings, how much that, you know, ate away at me inside, and I'm sure at them as well. And obviously with my mom and my dad as well, you know, I don't want this just to be about my siblings.
Yeah. No, it's hard. I mean, the family is, you're put into a role or assume a role that's really not what a 12-year-old should have. You know, in the ideal scenario, you would grow up as a son, and the dad would be there, and the mom together. And it's hard because you carry some of that weight, you know, unjustly, and then you struggle with, okay, now you are connected with your wife, and biblically we know that there's a leaving and cleaving, right? Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you've known what it's like to be a son and a father almost at the same time, you know, growing up. So you carry a little bit of that burden, and you, that seemed like that was some of the fertile soil, or some of the impetus then for this Everest trek was, oh, this would be a great chance to reconnect with, you know, a brother.
Yeah, it really was. And that was, you know, around that time, it might have been 2013 that I was thinking about it. And I've followed Everest, you know, I wouldn't say my whole life, but for a while. And I've always wanted to do that trek. I've always wanted to trek to base camp. So it was around 2013, 2014 that I was just trying to reconnect with my brother then at that point. So we'd always keep in touch, but just on, you know, that spiritual level. I really had this presence on me that I needed to witness to my brother, like really witness to him. I mean, he knew that we went to church, and, you know, our boys went to church. So he knew that, you know, I was a Christian, and, but I'd never really truly pressed upon him, you know. I'm laid back. I can't get the Bible up and thump it across his...
It doesn't work with family anyway.
No. I can't do that anyway. That's not how I'm wired. But,
yeah.
So we, getting around that, you know, I kind of got to the point where it's like, hey, we need to spend some time together. So he said, yep, let's find something to do. So we're like, what do you mean? You want to go, you know, go somewhere or whatever? And he goes, let's find a hike or something like that. So, oh, okay. So we started looking. And it was Jason, my brother, that came up with the Everest Base Camp trek.
Wow.
He's like, let's check this out. And I was like, oh, okay.
It's pretty epic.
Yeah, it is. And when you look at it, I mean, it's like one of the, it was difficult. It's not unattainable, which is great. But I mean, the criteria we wanted was just something that was going to be, we'd be in a foreign country that we both hadn't been to. It would be like no tech, so that you wouldn't, you know, have cell phones and all that sort of stuff. So we'd, you know, shut away from all of that. And, you know, we just wanted it to be a time that we'd be able to spend a lot of time together, just an experience for the both of us to have. And that's where, the trek to base camp came from. So
now, he's birth order. Your brother is?
He is fourth.
Fourth? Okay.
Yep. Well, no, he's fourth youngest. Sorry, because I said I was the...
You're the oldest,
right?
I'm trying to do the math here.
Right.
So you come together, you're like, okay, this would be a great thing. You're like, oh, this would be great. We'll be able to talk about spiritual stuff, and maybe there could be a favorable outcome where he could become a follower of Christ. I mean, all these ideal scenarios play out in your mind, and you begin to think, you know, wow, wouldn't this be fantastic? And what better place to do it than Everest? It gives you plenty of time, low technology. What could go wrong, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's a stable mountain.
Right.
The food's great, you know, and so you play off all these positives and just cannot even fathom what a worst case scenario might look like. Because we know that most of the people that are going to perish on Everest, they're the ones who add zeros to the dollar signs. You know, once they leave Everest Base Camp and go through the Khumbu Ice Fall, then all of a sudden you're looking at an extra set of zeros, ladders, gaping crevasses, high altitude, all kinds of issues. So you wouldn't think, oh, this trek is arduous, but it's fairly safe. And then something happens. So let's maybe put that that picture up here. So this is a great shot of basically before the world shook. I mean, literally. So you're taking this picture here, and this is iconic. We actually put it in the promo pieces. It's the iconic yellow and red and black sign there that leads your way to base camp. And so give us an idea here. Everest Base Camp then is what, around this ridge line then?
It's actually up around behind where I am. So
okay, so this is actually your turning point then. You're going to go behind this, and in just a moment, literally within minutes of this shot, right, the whole ground shakes. Just maybe take us to this moment. You've been on the trail for a while. I know in some of our base camps you've actually been able to walk us through with like a slideshow, which was fantastic. In fact, when you were at Railtown, you did that, which was fantastic. It felt like a big giant living room, and you were walking us through every moment. But we're fast forwarding the tape. So what's it like? You're getting up to this point, and what are you feeling right now? And maybe set the stage for that day of how did that day play out, and where should you have been, and all those kind of issues.
Yeah, so it was interesting. I believe this was our 6th day or 7th day on the track. So you start off the trek out of Kathmandu, you fly into Lukla. Lukla's about 9,000 feet, and then you're trekking all the way through. And then we had 2 acclimatization days, which basically means that you might sleep at 12,000 feet, and then you will climb up 1,000 and then come back down. Right. So you get your body used to acclimatizing. So through that whole trek to get us to this point, we befriended Jake. He became good mates of ours. And
where's Jake from?
Jake's from New York.
Okay.
Yeah, he's a local boy.
America.
Well, he's from from America. And Jason and him hit him off because they're about the same age.
Yeah.
So which was great. And then I was just kind of tagged myself with him. But we were, I would say, of the rest of the group, the most fit, and we became really good friends with our, the guides, the Sherpas, and our head guide, and they would let us walk ahead, not too far, but just far enough that we'd kind of be ahead of the group, that we weren't really feeling like we were part of the group. Yeah, if that made sense.
Well, you're saying this very delicately. I know what you're trying to say here, because when you travel and climb mountains around the world, Americans, quite frankly, and I'm not bashing on Americans because I am one. I'm also partly European, I suppose, because my parents are Dutch immigrants. But as a whole, we don't have the best reputation. Typically, we overpack. There's too much stuff. We can have a sense of entitlement. And sometimes that doesn't bode well on the mountain, because the mountain is the great equalizer. Nobody cares, how big your bank account is. Nobody cares really how great or how powerful your country is, because the mountain it just flattens the plane, and everybody's equal. And for those that come with ultra mega egos onto the mountain, it doesn't really bode well. And we, as a whole, there is some of that vibe. There's that tension between Europeans or the British Commonwealth and Americans. And I felt that on trips. Whenever I got in trouble for geopolitical reasons, I always suddenly became a Canadian, because everybody likes Canadians, right? And all I got to do is just say, "Oh, I'm sorry, or let's play some hockey, so you could kind of easily go into that whole mode. But I know part of the reason why you're trying to remain separate was there was a part of the group that you necessarily wouldn't hang around with if it wasn't for this expedition.
Yeah, that was, yes, that was more politically correct.
Very kindly.
Yeah.
But you liked this guy, and so the 3 of you were kind of a group.
Yeah, we did. And, it kind of lends into getting to this point here, because we're always, 15, 20, 30 minutes ahead of the group. They'd say, hey, we're going to stop up here for lunch, or typically what they would do, because those guys are machines. One of the lead cooks or something like that would just start running, and they'd run ahead and prepare and get everything ready.
Literally run. And you're just like, how in the world can these guys do that?
It's incredible. So they would be there, and we would arrive, then the rest of the group would arrive. So
would they set your tents up and everything as well? Or because you guys tented the whole
time.
We did. You didn't do lodges?
No. Yeah, that's part of the reason why we went with the group that we did, because they followed the exact same route that climbers would take.
Okay.
So the same acclimatization, the slow pace, getting in, getting acclimatized, getting ready to be able to sleep there at base camp for a while you're doing your summit bid.
Yeah.
So that was part of the reason why we went with them. And the other one was we just wanted to tent all the way through. and they cooked for us as well. One of the big reasons why people end up getting sick is because of eating uncooked food or eating food in the villages as they go through.
Yeah.
So we wanted to give ourselves the best success rate of being able to make it. So that's why we did it this way.
It's a true trek for you then. I mean, you're not doing a hut-to-hut thing.
Oh, no.
Yeah,
Right.
you're out there in the tents, and which, quite frankly, is probably healthier, too. I mean, the lodges can be just, now that we're in this global pandemic, people are thinking about this more, but there's just stuff there, and altitude certainly takes away some of those elements. So how long did it take for you to get to this point? And you're just about ready to, round the corner and reach the goal that you're achieving, but how long have you been on the trail at this point then?
Yeah, so we've been on the trail for about 7 days, but this was the morning of. So we'd gotten into a little area called Gorek Shep, and that's basically the last kind of hut frontier place before you get to base camp. And I believe it's roughly, maybe 2 hours or so hike from Gorek Shep around to base camp.
Okay.
So this was the morning of. We had just come in from Leboche, I believe it was, and in the Gorek Shep that morning. And we were going to stay in Gorek Shep that night and then climb a peak called Kalapatar the next day. So we had got in early, set our stuff down, and we basically wanted to be the first group out. Because, there's people everywhere. There's people trekking on this all the time.
And it's pretty dusty. I mean, this is like it's just...
Very much. Actually, this day here was the first day that we saw any snow or anything. Really? Every other day was, crystal blue skies. The sun was out. Some days we were walking in shorts. It was just incredible. Absolutely perfect until this morning. So we get into Gorek Shep and we put all our stuff away. And then we wanted to be the first group out. Well, we got down and we're getting ready to go, and we were still waiting on that other rest of our group to come down. So we decided to play a game of cards, and kind of as we're waiting for them. So they came down. We said we're going to finish our game of cards before we go. So we did, and then we went. So they had
Which
to
is
wait
unusual.
A little bit. Yes,
everything flipped the last.
Very much. Yeah.
You should have been here earlier.
Oh yeah.
Which would have put you in harm's way, as we'll find out here in just a moment.
Yeah.
What is a typical day? Because this again is like going to the moon for most of us in the Midwest. What does an average day look like? Are you maybe ascending 1,000, 2,000 feet then? And I like the whole way that you describe that. And for those of us that are flatlanders, which is all of us here in Michigan or the Midwest, and of course we'll have viewers everywhere after this has been produced. But it's the whole idea of climbing high but camping low. Yeah. Get your stuff up, then get back down, sleep at that altitude, and then the next day or the day after, if there's weather issues, then you go up to where some of your gear is stored as well. But what's an average day elevation gain, and what's it like? You see these iconic photos, these gaping ravines and these rope bridges that you're crossing over with all the Tibet prayer flags and Nepalian prayer flags. What's an average day look like?
Yeah, so we'd get up early in the morning. The guides would cook breakfast for us, and bless their heart, they wouldn't let us help or do anything. So that's just the Nepalese people. So they're so just giving and so kind. We didn't come across any bad anything anywhere. In Kathmandu, in all of the villages and everything that we went through, they're so kind-hearted in nature. That's who they are. So we would get up and then basically pack everything up. Everything is taken in on yaks pretty much. Right. So, or yapels, which is kind of like a cross between a cow and a yak. So they would, pack everything up, throw it all on, and off we'd go. So we'd head out, and then the yaks would head out before us, and then we'd catch them up and then crisscross and all that sort of stuff. So elevation gain, there would be maybe a couple of thousand in a day. But then in some points you would be descending that as well. Right. Because we followed the Dutz River, which is basically, so the Khumbu Icefall, which falls into the glacier, which makes base camp, that falls into a river. And then that river, which is going down through there, is called the Dutz River. It's a beautiful, the blue color is hard to explain. like a crystal kind of a blue with white through it.
Yeah, probably like a Lake Louise in Canada is something we
Yeah,
might be familiar with.
it's beautiful, but you're constantly crisscrossing over that river and following it. So you're always climbing up, down, around, and all over
It's
the
all
place.
those minerals that are getting emulsified in the glaciers. It's just surreal.
Oh yeah.
Like
yeah.
As you look at it, and you're like, is this a painting? I mean, it's just, it's a
I know,
crazy blue color.
I look back on pictures and it just doesn't do it justice at
Yeah.
all. I mean, it really doesn't. You're surrounded by beautiful, Abu Dhabi, and these mountain ranges are just incredible, and they're humongous, and you just feel so small and insignificant through it all. But it was perfect, and like I said, we had great weather up until this point, and we were feeling really good. At this point, where base camp's at about 17,000 feet. And the highest I'd ever been to was 12,000 feet before.
Okay.
So we had done it right. We had, eating right and exercising, doing everything the right way. And we're feeling pretty good on this day.
So any premonition of what's about to happen?
No.
Nothing. Just everything's just going as planned, and this is fantastic. We're going to take a picture. We're going to round the corner, and we're going to be meeting some world-class climbers. And how long would they have let you hang out in the base camp? Just for that day then, or would you overnight there?
No, we weren't going to overnight in base camp. Probably until they kicked all of us out.
Yeah.
I mean, there's hundreds of people there at base camp.
Unbelievable. It's a city.
Oh yeah, the reason why we went during this time is because it's the start of the climbing season. So people were actually doing their acclimatization. Nobody was going for a summit on the 25th.
Yeah.
But there were people at camp too.
Yeah.
So, we wanted to arrive at base camp when stuff was happening. I mean, there's doctors, there's cooks, there's so much stuff going on there. So the plan for us for that day was to just be there for about half a day, see if we can see any celebs or anything, like any of the climbers and that sort of stuff. And then just head back to Gorek Shep. So that was the plan.
Yeah, the plan, and sometimes the plans get interrupted. So we're going to show a video here in just a moment, so please hang with us. But what is the first inclination that you had that something was askew? Because this picture is snapped, and then what are we looking at minutes later?
Not even minutes, I would say seconds.
Seconds.
So there were a couple of pictures taken that were like this. And then as we were stepping down off of those boulders, that's when...
Did you hear it first or feel it first? Or felt it?
Yeah.
The ground was literally shaking.
Yep. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. And then it just kept shaking and shaking. And you can see those boulders that we're standing on there. Those started to roll around like marbles.
Wow. Were the ravens, there's high altitude ravens, was any wildlife doing anything weird? Because you hear that about earthquakes and tsunamis, that the sonar abilities that they have that we don't have, the wildlife acts weird.
Right.
None of that is, or that you could see or hear?
No, I don't remember hearing anything like, you see movies and that sort of stuff, and there's like the birds fly, then there's the gunshot, that sort of a thing.
Well, the tsunamis especially, they just know something's wrong, and they're going up to, and even in the mountains, they can kind of sense these things long before we can. So let's play this clip again, and it's April 25th. You've now been on the trail for a week. Things are going great. No indication anything is going to happen. Almost like what we've been dealing with for the last couple of weeks, where you get in the middle of March and, hey, everything's going great. Everybody's looking forward to spring break. And then within a week, the whole world gets turned upside down. So maybe kind of juxtapose our current situation with this particular day, and we can learn from this particular episode. Let's go ahead and play that video.
Fox News alert now. New information on the panic and fear for dozens of climbers as they try to outrun a monstrous avalanche on Mount Everest when the earthquake shook. Oh!
We decided to take this trek even though it's one of the hardest ones around to do, just because we would get to spend a lot of time together. So we hiked every day with the intention of getting to base camp. As we trekked, we had awesome weather, great blue skies, the sun was out every day. Our guides were fantastic. The people we were trekking with were fantastic as well. My brother and I, we really got to bond during this time as we were on this journey. We got to the day to get to base camp, and we came into a place called Shep, which is roughly about 3.5 hours trek from the actual base camp. It was kind of an odd day. Weather was starting to come in. It was overcast, a little eerie, a little different. So our party trekked out, and there's an iconic sign. It's a yellow sign that has base camp this way with an arrow on it. My brother and I weren't sure if we should stop and take a picture there or not. We kind of went back and forth on it and decided, the weather could be bad on the way back, so we'll just stop and take a picture. I handed my camera over to our guide, and we got up on the rocks right next to the sign, and he snapped one picture. As soon as he snapped that picture, the ground started to shake. Instantly, we heard this roar, a sound that to this day I don't think I'll ever be able to describe properly. I realized that an avalanche was coming at us. It rose 30, 40, 50, 60 feet. It continued to get big, and then all of a sudden I was just encased in snow. I couldn't breathe. It was thick. I felt like I was almost underwater, just sucking in particles. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't hear anything. Everything was just this fog of white. Then maybe a couple minutes later, I heard my brother call, and it was good to hear his voice, to hear that he was okay. I looked down the ridge, I saw the rest of our party, although they were shaken and knocked to the ground, covered with 2 to 3 feet of snow. They were all starting to get up and were okay. But as we were leaving, we got our first glimpse of base camp and the devastation that the avalanche had in that area. Once we got to that point, our guides broke down again, almost more so than what they did before, because they had realized that if we had have gone over that ridge, if we hadn't have stopped to take pictures for 15 minutes, if my brother and I had been ahead of the rest of the group, which we were every other day, we probably wouldn't be here today. There are a lot of people there that didn't come back.
So, pretty dramatic.
Yeah.
I'm sure traumatic for you to watch that again, just to have those feelings come back. In fact, we were tentatively planning a year ago, before I had my little cardiac arrest, and it was probably providential that this didn't happen, but we were in serious talks about going back. Right. And I wanted to make sure that you were part of our team again. First of all, because we could just follow your footsteps, and you could be kind of our in-house guide, if you will. But secondly, is just to capture on camera with you right by that rock again, and feel like what it feels like now, what would have been 5 years removed. So tremendous amount of chaos. The sun is blotted out. It looks like a white tsunami is coming at you. You can't even breathe. You can't see. Total, complete disorientation to the extent that did you think this was it? This must be what it's like to die.
There was I didn't think of that in that moment, but after it now, I feel that I did have a split second of that.
Yeah.
So basically, as the earthquake shook, it was a 7.8. It rumbled everything around.
Which is massive.
Huge.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It was about 50 miles away from where we were at.
Wow.
The epicenter of it. I'd never been in an earthquake before. I didn't know how to react, what to do. And it just sort of rumbled what felt for, I don't know, maybe a minute or two. Not long. But I mean, it was enough that you feel that, to your bone. And as it was happening, funny story, we were, that picture where you could see where we were standing there, and then base camp was around the back. On this side of it was Kalapata, which was a mountain that we were going to climb the next day. So we're kind of, it was about maybe 200 feet away, but we were kind of trapped in a section there. And there's this massive mountain above you that you're thinking, well, is something going to come off the top of it?
Right.
Come down. Right at the base of that mountain is a cabin. And Nepalese guys came running out of it as the earthquake was happening, and they were yelling and dancing and singing. And
what were they thinking?
Maybe it was a religious thing. I had no idea, but it was such a surreal thing that, not knowing what to do, having this, and you're just full of fright.
Yeah.
And here's these yahoos over here dancing and singing and
almost like a chicken running around with their head cut off type thing. It's
crazy.
Just a weird reaction to it.
Right.
Yeah.
So that had happened. And the earthquake, now that I think about it, must have been for a couple minutes, because they had joined us before the avalanche had hit. They were standing next to us. And basically it settled down and it went eerily quiet. And then that's when we heard the crack. There was so we were faced this way, if you can kind of imagine it. So off to our left, there was basically, it sounded like a crack and a boom. And out of the corner of our eye, we could start to see some white. And Bardry kind of looked at us, and he was our head guide. He's the guy that took the picture. And he just yelled avalanche. And as we turned and looked, we saw, instead of the white off to our left, it was coming right at us. So there was a cloud of white that hit the ridge that was in front of us, and then the white was just kind of, the first part of it just filled the sky. And then all of a sudden, you could see this thin little sliver of the actual white and avalanche and everything get up over that ridge. And then that's when everyone just took off.
Yeah. Hundreds of tons of ice was just collapsing on itself and creating a wave, literally.
Right. Yeah. So basically what happened, there was two avalanches that happened. One came down through base camp, and then one came across the glacier and hit us the other way. So two went opposite ways. And, getting back to that point of thinking, was this it? My brother and Jake took off. They took off with the other guys. I instinctively just jumped down behind one of those boulders and just tucked up. The rest of our group, they were ahead of us in a little bit of a gully. So where we were, there was a gully down and then the ridge. So they were down in the gully there. I kind of took one quick look at them, and most of them were on the ground from the earthquake, just to stabilize themselves. And then then it just went white. I'm still here, so we're all still here.
Yeah.
But it was just an experience that it's very difficult to explain. As it was happening, the air got thick, very, very cold, and I could just feel like I was breathing in snow, even though it wasn't snow, but it just felt like everything became so thick and white, and to the point where I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face.
And that lasted for probably several minutes, I would think.
Yeah. Yep.
So complete disorientation. You're probably thinking at this point, okay, I just survived something, but in your mind, you're probably thinking, there's no way anybody in base camp could be living through this, because the whole sense of disorientation. It started as a cloudy day to begin with, so you don't have that contrast of a bluebird sky compared to everything else. So I'm sure there's a lot of things going on in your mind. Obviously, the first thing that you're thinking about is, where's my brother, right? So you go to what's most familiar and familial. And then that connection is remade, and then you're bumping into people that are having, different, it's almost like a 9/11 type of thing, just shock.
Yeah.
And it does weird things to people, and everybody reacts a little bit different, but some people are angry, some people are just lethargic, some people are in despair, some people are doing nothing, they're frozen, they're immobilized. Again, in many ways, like our current pandemic, there are those that will just not get out of their house, and there are those that's not an issue. And you have this stark contrast. It's this delicate neurology that's going on. So we know after the fact that there was about 22 climbers that did perish at base camp. And now, for those of you that are into Everest type stuff, instead of having a wide camp, if you will, it's like a singular line. So instead of something a mile wide, they have something that's like a couple miles long. And the logic of that is, if this thing ever happens again, that it has to go a very specific line to knock the whole village out, and to give it less proximity or less acreage and real estate for it to devastate. So, but the real devastation, and this is where you'll walk into it afterwards, is what happened below. I mean, thousands of people perished. Historic landmarks that are sacred to the Buddhist religion and to the people there, just utterly destroyed. And that's where a lot of us come into the news story of, these villages that are just absolutely destroyed. And a lot of people don't realize that there were actually, like you had mentioned, when you got there April 25th, there were already people up at camp too.
Oh, yeah.
So now you've got people that are stranded because the Khumbu Icefall, if you've seen the pictures with the ladders and the gaping crevasses, that's all destroyed. You cannot get through the Khumbu Icefall now. It's all collapsed. It's just a jumble of a mess. And so now you've got people like, how are we going to get these people down? I mean, getting up to Camp 1 is very precarious. It takes the world's best helicopter pilots to pull that off. So you've got people that are stranded. You've got people that are down below. What are you hearing right now? I mean, I remember you telling the story at some of our base camps that, you had thought there was just complete devastation and everybody on the mountain is dead and everything is destroyed. I mean, what were some of the rumors that were floating around in this chaos?
Yeah, it was crazy. So after it had happened and we kind of picked everybody up, I reunited with my brother and Jake, and we were all okay.
And did the rest of your team, the guys that were ahead, the American group, then join you at that point?
Yeah, we went down to them in the gully, made sure everybody was okay. And that's kind of the point when we were down there. Then all of the guides, they were happy. They were singing and hugging and just...
They had lived.
Right. And all of us were like, what just happened?
Yeah.
But they, I think they're familiar with not necessarily that magnitude, but I mean, stuff happens at Everest, you know? So, and the previous year, there had already been a disaster there at Avalanche, which took 16 Sherpas in the Khumbu Icefall.
The climbing company that I went with on all my 3 of the 5 continental summits, they lost like 5 or 6 Sherpas in that. So I feel one step removed. I knew the head Sherpa, and he was no longer climbing. He was at base camp, but it was terrible.
So it was devastating for them.
Now 2 years in a row.
Right, yeah. So that was just an odd, surreal thing. Jason and I tried to go up to the ridge because we instinctively knew something was wrong, that people had died. And we wanted to help. We had no business helping. I mean, we
you're like prohibited. Your guides won't let you do anything.
They called us back. So we make it all the way back. We trekked back to Gorek Shep, so the 2 huts that I'd mentioned that we started out from, and just kind of sat down. And just nobody said anything. We just sat and looked at each other. That place was packed because there were other groups there that were heading out for that day. And as we were walking back, we were passing groups that were at that stage of getting ready to come out. So we were passing people that were going through their own thing, then realizing that they could have also been just part of what had happened. I mean, the avalanche was that big that it ended up, there was more snow and ice and everything at Gorek Shep than when we left.
Wow.
We were already probably 200-300, feet away from that area. So it would have been surreal to see that thing from a GoPro or
Well, it adjusted the mountain's height as well.
Oh yeah, it did.
It knocked off the Hillary Step, which was one of the more formidable, obstacles on the south side. It's not like it's not there, but it's certainly much less than what it used to be in years past. It
changed the topography of the mountain in that area. But when we got back to Gorek Shep, that's when the whispers and stuff had started going on, and we'd started to hear reports that Kathmandu was gone. Like gone.
Just wiped out.
Yeah, there was a massive crack through the airport and the runway. Nobody was getting out. And of course, all of this was coming in through sat phone periodically. We had heard that base camp was gone. We were told hundreds of people had died there. And it was just insane. Until we had been there for about an hour. And then this group walks in. And it turned out to be, I think it was like four Aussies that walk in and sit down next to us. And all four of them sat there and just wept. I have never seen a stronger group of men come in so just defeated and sat down and wept. And we kind of gave them their space for a little bit and then went over and talked with them. And they happened to be between both of the avalanches.
Wow.
They saw the one rip through base camp and then come across and hit us. And they were fortunate not to be a part of either one of them. So they were actually the first group out for that day, hiking out from Gorak Shep. Maybe a couple of hours after that, the first couple of people started to show up from base camp. And they were in bad shape because the trek wasn't there anymore. The trail wasn't there anymore.
Wow.
So they were basically trying to find their way back. And then, during that time, I mean, there are much more qualified people there than us. And they had already started to create a triage tent. Things were happening very, very quickly. And speaking of just mountaineering, I guess... when we got back into Gorak Shep, Peter Hillary was there. And I had a conversation with him. He was asking where we were, and Peter Hillary happened to be the son of Edmund Hillary, the guy that first climbed it. So,
a Kiwi.
Yep, that's right. That's okay.
Yeah. I know there's a little bit of a tension there between the Aussies and Kiwis, but he was the right guy to first summit, that humble man, and did a lot for and still does. The legacy there, the schools and the orphanages, and it's just phenomenal that a man that was just a humble beekeeper, became, it was a really important moment really in the overall Commonwealth history, because it was shortly thereafter, or it might have been before, when Elizabeth was crowned queen. So this was a great story coming up out of the, the ashes, if you will, of World War II, and believing in the rebirth of greater hope. So you're making your way down, absolute chaos. You're hearing that there are reports that people have survived, and you're meeting people that have survived. Lots of just shock. 2,000 yard stare. Men and women that are just destroyed in the inside, can't believe what they've seen. Trying to process. You're getting down into villages that are now even in worse shape. How did you exit out of the region? And then I want to talk about some of the takeaways that you had from the story.
Yeah. So the following day, we stayed in Gorak Shep that night. And I mean, there were earthquakes every day until we left.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So that night, there was a 6.4 when we were all asleep,
To wake you up?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And then you're probably everybody getting out of their tents and just like, okay, let's just visualize what's going on here.
Yeah. So I remember after it had happened and we were sitting there, for that couple of hours, there was one happened then, and everybody ran out except for the fellow that was tending the bar or whatever, the little makeshift bar. He's like, what are you all going to do? I mean, it's coming down. It's coming down.
Well, did you see the footage of the two German guys, that were actually at base camp?
Yeah.
Like, the ground is shaking, and then all of a sudden there's a bunch of expletives, actually many expletives, and then they jump into their tent and it becomes literally like they're in a wash machine.
Right.
I mean, just, and they have the GoPro going on just like your brother did, and it's insane. So you're walking out of this and you're encountering just more and more trauma. It's layered.
Yeah, it was difficult because on the one side, our guides had to get us out, and talking about the information that was coming down the line is that all of a sudden it had become chaotic at Lukla, where we had to fly out of. Which, by the way, is one of it may be the world's worst airport. I think it's third on the list. If you've seen pictures, it's crazy. I mean, you have the runway and then it drops. Oh, yeah. Like probably a mile. Yeah. It's unbelievable. Yeah, and then when you're landing, it lands into a cliff. Like there's a mountain there, so you got to stop. I mean, it's awesome. But So to their credit, our guides' credit, they really pushed us along, and we wanted to. Every village you'd go through, there would be a houses down, or there would be a body, or there would, just so much mourning as you're going through there.
It's like a massive grave.
Yeah.
People are buried under the rubble, and they're not going to get to them in time.
Right. Yep.
If at all.
Right. So it was, looking back on that, it was difficult to just kind of fast track through that, because you have this sense of wanting to be able to help people, but on the flip side of that, you've got your guides and you're kind of their livelihood, and they need to get you out as well. So it wasn't, I believe it was 3 days that we got back to Namche, which is kind of like the party town of the Himalayan area. And that's when I first spoke to my wife about it. So
did she know prior to that? Had the team leader communicated that the team is okay, or was she still in the dark?
She was still in the dark.
Wow. So those are 3 terrible days for her, I'm sure.
Yeah, and they, the group that we were trekking with, they contacted everyone and said that, hey, you've probably heard, because it was world news.
Oh, sure.
Something's happened. Everybody is safe and everybody's okay, and that's what she'd heard. She didn't know that we were actually in it, or a part of it. Just that something had happened, but everybody's okay. So that was, for me, that was another very surreal moment. When we were in Gorak Shep before we left, I just shot off a quick text. No idea if they were going to get it or not. I said, "Hey, I love you. We're at Gorak Shep. We're going to go to base camp. We're finally here. I'll try to hit you back when I can."
Wow. So how long were you delayed then getting out? I'm sure airport issues and just...
Right. We weren't. So
so they really
to our guides'
fast-tracked
credit,
Yeah.
they pretty much, I remember the day that we left out of Lukla. So after we'd hiked all the way back down, we got into Lukla, and Lukla was crazy. But since the 25th, we'd been hiking for 5 days yet. So all of the rescue efforts, everything that was going on up at base camp, helicopters flying through every day, all the time, when they could to get up to base camp, we'd see them fly over. And then, of course, everything was happening then in Kathmandu and in all of the other villages that were devastated. Those rescue efforts had already happened. So by the time we got into Lukla, we thought that things would have been sorted out or calmed down, but it was just chaos. Most people, when they travel in there, if they're not going with a group, they kind of rely on just figuring it out. So to get out, if you don't have anything booked, then you're out of luck and you're stuck. And still we're hearing reports that, flyers are not flying out of Kathmandu. So people just get stuck. Our guides, we kind of had a night in Lukla before we left, and I guess we weren't too worried, but kind of a little bit worried that we weren't going to get a flight out. But they pretty much took over the place and just, all right, this is our plan, get on, we're going. Go.
Yeah, and you do it.
Right.
Yep. Yeah, you're on the hook, and they're going to bring you home safe. So, and everything instinctually inside of you is like, man, I want to help. I want to do something here, and yet they have a professional obligation to carry you through. Yeah, every mountain expedition I've been on, you're forbidden to rescue anybody. They're like, you're just responsible to get yourself. We're responsible for you, and you're not responsible for anybody else. And that's hard because it goes against really your code of honor as a man. You want to help, you want to do something. So you get back home. We didn't really tackle, some of the conversations that you may have liked to have had, or what the eventual outcome was with your brother. But we know from some of our base camp meetings that there wasn't some climactic, spiritual moment that, would have brought some closure to that. So that story is still continuing. That journey is still going on. But to give ourselves some time for Q&A, what was and it may be a couple, but maybe the top 2 or even just one, if you want to limit it to one, what was a takeaway that you had after this whole thing settled? What was your big takeaway?
Oh, man. I would think that the big takeaway for me is that you can't, going back to wanting to be able to, witness to my brother, is that I had a conversation with someone recently, which is what I love about base camp, is just conversations.
Yeah.
Everybody's had a story or had an experience. The conversation I had with one follower, he came to the realization too, is that, we can't make somebody follow the faith. We can't make someone turn to God.
Thing. Yeah.
No, we can lead by an example.
Yeah.
But I can't make that decision for my brother. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways that I took from that, is that I was all gung-ho to do this. And it's not in my time, it's in his time.
Yeah. And it's a story, it continues.
Yes.
You planted seeds and it was a chapter, and who knows, maybe we can have your brother come back with us too.
I would love more than that to happen. So, but just that. And then, as I mentioned before when we started, just about being present, that text message that I had have sent might have been the last thing that my wife had have gotten, that my boys would have known. What life did I leave behind? As I mentioned before, I'm not a perfect man. And I still struggle through things. But I almost want to be able to give people a bottle or an elixir of something and say, here, take this. This is what it feels like to, possibly just be gone, and then think back on what you should have done or what you didn't do.
Yeah.
And then go and resolve that or fix it.
And you're almost wanting to drink that as well yourself, to just remind yourself.
Absolutely.
Of bringing yourself back to that moment of, okay, there's nothing guaranteed. Control is an illusion. Things can happen that are way beyond the script that we would write. But if we just trust God and stay, in the story, that some good things can happen, but we have to stay in the story.
Mm-hmm.
So for those of you that are viewing, whether you're doing it live with us or you catch it afterwards, that's really, I think, one of the main messages that we can walk away from. And Clayton probably noticed this as well, and it's part of his story. It's part of a lot of people's stories. But the big question for climbers is, or anybody that's into extreme adventure, is the why. And George Mallory, who was someone who had attempted to climb Everest with British expeditions in 1921, 22, and 24, and ultimately perished there. They saw him at 26,500 feet through the telescope, and then he vanished into legend. And they found his body actually in 1999. But they asked him, why are you climbing Everest? And he's like, well, because it's there. And that's a great, poetic answer, but it doesn't really deal with some of the stuff that's under the hood. And I found, after coming through my own healing journey and processes, that many people are doing extreme adventures. They're on climbs or North Pole treks or whatever, because they can't do 18 inches from the head to the heart. They have to go 18,000 feet. They have to go 18,000 miles. And there's something about the human anatomy that is very interesting in that if you can't do the internal journey, the inward journey, you have to always externalize the pain. If you can't internalize it and process it and get out of your head into your heart where all the deep things in life happen, then unknowingly and unwittingly, you will actually find yourself processing trauma externally in the hopes that somehow the mountain will teach you something, or a trek. And it does. There's a cathartic value for sure. I'm not one to deny that. But the mountain can't heal you. Nature really doesn't have the ability to touch deep things inside of you. It is an epistle that we learn from Paul, so it does emulate and gives light to the character and image of Christ, but it's Christ alone that really has the ability and the power to heal. So to the extent that nature and Christ cooperate, or you allow that cooperation to happen, is the extent that you'll actually find healing. So hikes are wonderful, treks are wonderful, climbing is a wonderful thing, but those activities alone can't touch the deep trauma that is pervasive and endemic, if you will, or is natural for our human journey as people. So I would just encourage you to think about that for a moment. I know that's some deep stuff there, but I found after doing a lot of extreme adventures and having some special ops guys talk with me on Mount Ararat and help me to understand that trauma is a delicate surgery. And it's not limited to just people who have experienced actual battlefield experiences, combat experiences, but it's for those of us that have had moments in our life where the topography of our interior geography was experienced upheaval. And we all know what those moments feel like. It feels frozen. It feels very disquieted. The landscape disappears. We lose our sense of orientation. But I will tell you this, that over time, if you stay in your story and you get involved in community and you have some church that you're a part of and you practice contemplation, which is another word for prayer, being silent before God and listening, and also getting involved in some counseling and therapy that we talked about 2 weeks ago with John Collier, that when those four streams converge together, you will find that the future is no longer something that you should fear, and the past is no longer something that should punish you, and it allows you to be present. It allows you to be now. And it's a haunting thing to live your life never being able to be now. And so I would encourage you, you don't have to go to Everest to experience these things, but it provides a dramatic template and a parable for us to kind of bring closure to some certain chapters in our life of why I'm doing the things that I'm doing. And I just really appreciate you, Clayton, coming on and sharing. I'd love to get you back there to Everest. It's on our plate of things to do as Grace Explorations. If I go, I'm not going to go alone. I want to take a community of men and women on this trek and make a little mini documentary out of it and talk about why we do base camp because of all the reasons that we've talked about, that the air is thick, the communication is there, the medic tent is there, all the good things that happen on a mountain happen at base camp. So we're going to do some Q&A here real quick, but before we do, we just have one or two slides here real quick that I'd like to get to. Again, an opportunity to give if you've just tuned in or tuned in late. We want to give everybody an opportunity to give, and you can go to graceexplorations.com. This is a partner-supported ministry. It's a nonprofit ministry, so whatever you give is tax-deductible. You can simply go to graceexplorations.com and click on the donate button and give whatever you can. We would appreciate that. It costs us about $500 per episode, so if you want to sponsor that, that would be great, or give whatever you can and feel led to. Secondly, let's talk about Michael Vorse. Michael is another great friend of the ministry. Michael is an individual who has a dramatic story as well. He stole millions before God saved him. He was on American Greed, which is not necessarily a badge of honor, but what I love about Michael is that he has owned his story, went through several years of incarceration, was a big story, a national story actually, that found its origin here in West Michigan. And there were tens of millions of dollars that was involved, and he served his time. And I just want to applaud the courage of this man to show up at many of our base camps in person and speak about a very difficult time in his life and own the mistakes that he's made and allow God to receive glory through that. So we're going to put him on our live stream here in 2 weeks. It's a great story, and I'm just so excited about getting something positive on the internet about Michael Vorse. He's a great friend, and he's a great man, a great family man, and it's just really cool to see the way God is turning something that is turning something very positive into something that was once just all negative. So join us on May 31st for that. And let's take a couple of Q&A here, and then we can close in a word of prayer here in a moment. So the first question for you, Clayton, is how did you transition back to a normal life as a husband, a guy living everyday life? How do you go from this big, giant, epic story to doing what you do every day?
Right. Well, I think it is a journey still every day. For me, it was a profound thing. But before this had happened, I was very much an introvert. I'd be very quiet. I would be the guy in the back of the room. I'd listen, but I wouldn't necessarily throw myself out there. Since this, I've thrown myself out there, and I try to do that daily in everything that I do. And it almost goes back to that elixir, knowing that, any given day, any of us could not be here anymore.
Yeah.
Whatever it is. I mean, you get in the car and something happened, But, I just always want to be present every time where I'm at. My boys want to play another game on the PlayStation, I'll go do it with them. Those sorts of things. Be attentive to my wife. Go back on those relationships with my siblings. One thing that this has done for me, I think, which has been something that I needed, I think, has just been almost a reset. So in some ways, I feel like that whole process is a forgiveness thing again, where I've gone through this event and then I'm able to now go back through everything and, do what I need to do. So
That's always some of the most depressing moments for a lot of people that do great adventures are what comes on the tail end, because you get this adrenaline rush and you actually become a junkie after a while. Some climbers call it feeding the rat. It's just this insatiable appetite to always have to do more. But I think when you look under the hood, that's what I love about you, is you're not afraid to be introspective. And you probably found out that there's not a lot of Christian climbers running around. They tend to either be pantheists, where they're worshiping nature and confusing the idea that, God may be infused in everything, but God is not everything. God is not that mountain. You don't need to deify that mountain, but the aura of God is everywhere. He owns every square inch of creation, but he's not necessarily his creation. So, or they become, quite frankly, Buddhists. Many of my climbing friends that were neutral when it came to religion had experiences in the Himalaya, and because the Sherpas were just such fine quality human beings, humble.
I could see that.
Ego was deconstructed, which is the opposite of Western civilization. Everything we do is built on the ego in many ways, and they deconstruct it to the point where you're like, I want to be like that guy. Ultimately, theologically, they end up in a quagmire. But there's character traits that I think we can learn from, and which is one of the reasons why I'd love to go to Nepal, is I think the Sherpa are some of the finest human beings I've ever met. I don't agree with their end result theologically, but as a person, as a human, fantastic people. Strongest per ounce that you'll find of any human, and just giving, effusive that way. They're just wonderful. So here's another question. What helped you settle in your mind and heart that you needed to follow your guides rather than stay and help?
That's a tough question. I think more of that is, you go back to that machoism and wanting to help, and then I don't think it took very long for us to realize that we're out of our element. Yeah. I mean, we'd been out of our element since when we landed in Kathmandu.
Like, where would you even start? I mean, it's just
no idea.
What do you do? You pick up that brick? I mean, how do you know who to save or what to do?
Right.
It's overwhelming.
We had, no business going over that ridge because we had no idea what was there. I mean, the trek had been gone anyway the trail had been gone to be able to get to base camp anyway. So, and then as we're walking back out and through, we felt bad, walking past some of these villages and not stopping and helping. But again, to their credit, we were under the care of those guides, and we had to stick to a plan to be able to get back out, and that's what they did. It was difficult.
Yeah. Well, it almost it gives this whole idea of there is privilege. Right? We're both Western guys, and we've paid a lot of money, and we have the wherewithal to hire these people to make sure that we're safe. And then you notice the disparity of people who don't have the connections. They don't have the guide. They don't have a piece of paper that says, I'm responsible for you. And you walk right through these human tornadoes of wreckage, and you begin to realize, wow, there really is a different class system here. It feels strange because you almost feel... I did in several occasions where it was like all these people, like when we went back to Ararat 5 summers in a row, and you realize that all the stuff that the uproar that some of our expeditions would cause, we didn't have to deal with any of that. Yeah. We jump on a plane, and head back to America and talk about our adventures.
Right.
Meanwhile, the people that were part of our group that lived there, quite frankly, some of them actually gave their life for it. And you kind of walk away from that saying, man, that's just, that shows you the class divide here of people that live in huts that are literally made out of cow manure, are illiterate shepherds on Mount Ararat compared to us Americans. And I don't know, it's a strange, I don't like that feeling. I don't even know what to do with it, but you notice the disparity of people who have and those that have not. And you find that you're in the have camp and you don't know how to rectify that because the other camp is so large and it's so overwhelming, you don't even know where to start.
Right. Yeah. And that question kind of pulls at my heartstrings a little bit. I don't like talking about regrets, but if there was one thing that I wish we had have done more was to help.
Yeah.
By the time we got into Kathmandu, it had already been, that 5 days, that 6 days, and we got there. And there was nobody living in houses there. They were all living in tents, and there weren't enough tarps around anywhere because they were fearful because there'd been like shocks every day.
And this is high altitude. This is cold. I mean, these people are freezing.
Yep. Yeah. And it was just, devastating to see all of that and like not be able to do anything.
Yeah, because it feels like, well, because of your contract and the responsibility the guides have, it insulates you from it. Mm-hmm. It's weird. It's like it's going all around you, but it's not impacting you. It is, because you witness, but you're in this bubble. And you go through this tragedy in a bubble, and then you jump in an airplane, and then you go back to another bubble.
Right.
And you just want to pop that, but to do that, then it's like, oh my gosh, then where do you even start? Right. So I would ask you one question. I don't think we have any more here, at least that I have listed, is what would bring you back, or why would you want to go back? Because some people would be like, you know what, that didn't end well, and I would rather not visit that again. Because we've talked about this for now a year and a half, maybe even 2 years now. What's the engine now that's driving you to go back?
You know, I have always been someone that I don't let fear dictate what I do. You know, like I'm not going to let that experience, taint wanting to go there. So
that's interesting.
And then part of that also is I'm a man. I didn't get there.
Yeah.
That's one of the things.
It was just around the bend.
That's one of the things that, Jake and, my brother Jason, we talk about. And we talked about possibly going back there this year, just because it had been 5 years. And as it turns out, it probably was a good thing that we didn't plan on doing that. But, just that wanting to complete it.
Right. It's undone.
Right. It's just one of those things that, I always wanted to get there and still haven't yet. I mean, it was tragic what had happened. So tragic, and so thankful that the good Lord saw fit to bring us out of it. But it still feels unfinished. Yeah. That would be part of the reason for wanting to go back and then just kind of live through that again. Relive the purpose of me wanting to do that, to witness to my brother, kind of rehash that a little bit. And then everything that God did, to me, coming back through that in my mind and my journey and figuring that out. So.
Well, that's a good word. Let's close on that, and I'll have a word of prayer here. But what Clayton said is actually incredibly important and applicable for our day and age, and it's this idea of what do you base your decisions on? And I'm not going to turn this into something political, but it is a primary question that we all have to ask ourselves is, are you going to be a person whose first emotion is fear with any decision that you make, or is it going to be based on faith? And again, there's discretion, and there's a lot of real estate in between those two things. But I like what he said is not making his decision based on fear and not doing something just because you're afraid, because courage actually comes out of fear. We don't have courage unless we have something that we're actually afraid of, right? So I think it was Mark Twain or somebody said that courage is actually fear that it said its prayers. So it's not denying that fear is there, because it's there, and that's okay. Right. There's healthy aspects to fear. The same way it would be with a lion or something that could actually kill you. You have a respect and a fear there, and I think that reverence is also applicable in our relationship with God. I didn't put this quote up, and I should have, but I'm just thinking about it now, and then we'll close. Spurgeon said something to the effect that when you are afraid of God, and I know that word has a lot of elasticity to it, but we can also use that word reverence, although I think fear and respect also fits in with a lion analogy. But he said when your highest fear, when your highest amount of reverence and respect is reserved for Almighty God, then that fear and that reverence actually drives out all lesser fears. And so I would leave that with you today in the middle of this pandemic, is be afraid and be reverent and be respectful of God first and foremost. And then submit your life to Him and submit your will to Him and let Him govern your trek wherever that may lead on your journey. But make sure that the thing that you respect the most and that you have the most amount of reverence for and the most amount of healthy fear towards is God Almighty. And then all these other lesser fears will begin to fall away, and you'll begin to be able to live a life without fear. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much that you have paved the way for us. I thank you that you know the journey that lies ahead, And in many ways, your son actually is the journey. He's the way, he's the truth, he's the life, he's the door into these other dimensions. And so I pray, God, that we would trust you on our journey. And I pray for those who are listening tonight or in the weeks and months and years after this broadcast, after this live stream, that they will just submit themselves to Almighty God, and they would begin to realize that a lack of fear in our life is because we have ultimately come to that place where we respect and we revere and we are following after God. And so I pray for those who are in a lot of fear right now. I pray that faith will rise up. I pray that Jesus Christ will become real to them, and that he'll be that calm in the center of that storm as he was for Clayton and his brother over 5 years ago on April 25th in 2015. And so I pray that that will happen, Lord, and keep us far away from fear. You've said it so many times throughout the scriptures, fear not, fear not. And you also said trust, and you also said obey, and you also said follow. And so I pray, Lord, that we will heed your call, and we will pay our highest respect and reverence and healthy fear towards Almighty God, so that all these lesser fears will fall away. We thank you for that. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
We'll see you again in 2 weeks on May 31st with Michael Vorse. Thank you so much for tuning in. I didn't say this at the beginning, but my name is Kevin DeVries, and I'm one of the team members here. Many thanks to Corbin and Todd for being our producers of this show, and thank you, Clayton, for coming on.
Thanks.
God bless you, and let's get back to Everest again.